So I'm going to start by the first part of this first topic, computing basics and connecting to the server, which is computing basics and opening the terminal. And the goal here is really just to give you the terminology and the terms that we're going to use during this whole module. So we're going to start this topic on computing basics and connecting to the server. So this topic is made of two modules. The first one is computing basics and opening the terminal, and the second one is connecting to the server. So here we are for the first module, computing basics and opening the terminal. So I'm going to start with computing basics. So first, you have your data that are stored in different files within different directories that are represented by some little folder here. Then you have some programs that have each specific goal. So for example, with Word, you're going to edit your text file. With Excel, you're going to play with some numbers and some computation. And then you have some interface to use these programs and to see at this data. So you can have graphical interface as this one, where you're going to click on every number to perform some computation and have the result outputted here. Or then, and this is what we're going to be interested in, and then you have some command line interface where you're going to type directly your computation and you're going to have the output immediately. So now let's talk about computing vocabulary. So first, what is an operating system, or OS? So an operating system is a software that manages the computer's memory and processes. So you are used to graphical user interface, such as Windows, or macOS, or Ubuntu. But what we're interested in here is a command line interface. The most famous one is Unix, and this is a commercial operating system. And this is what, for example, is installed on your Mac terminal. And then you have Linux, which is a free operating system that is similar to Unix. Okay? And so in some graphical user interface, such as Ubuntu, which is free, you're going to have a Linux command line interface. Then, what is a terminal? A terminal is an interface where you type and execute text commands and read their outputs. Then you have a shell. So a shell is a command line interpreter taking commands from the terminal and giving them to the operating system. So the one we're going to use is Bash, which is the most commonly used Unix shell and command language. But you have also other type of shells, such as Windows shell, which is a shell used in Windows and which is different from the Bash shell. So for example, all the commands we're going to learn can only be typed in a Bash shell and cannot be typed in a Windows terminal, which does not recognize the Bash shell, but which recognizes its own shell, which is called Windows shell. So by default, you do not have a Bash shell on Windows, but it's possible to emulate a Bash shell in Windows, and you will have a link to see how to install such a Bash shell if you have a Windows operating system. Okay, so now let's see what does a terminal look like. So a terminal is a window with a prompt waiting for your command. And what you're going to see above is all the commands you previously typed and their results. So for example, here, previously, we typed 3 different commands: whoami, pwd, ls, and what you can observe after these commands is the results of these commands. So now let's talk about what is a local system. So your personal computer is a local system. So it means it has a graphical user interface, which is either Windows, macOS, or Ubuntu, that you can interact with keyboard and mouse. With this local system, you can do simple and short tasks. You can store your own data with a maximum amount of something around 1 terabyte for most of the computer. Your computer has few processors and limited memory. You can run simple computation when the system is on, which means that you cannot run computation when your laptop is off. This system is only used by you. And most important, it's not designed to run a large GWAS. It doesn't have enough storage, it doesn't have enough processor and memory to run really computations on really, really large files. On the other hand, the broad server is a remote system. So what does it mean? It means that it doesn't have a graphical user interface. It has only an operating system, which is Unix or Linux, which is a command line interface. So the broad server can do complex tasks, which means that it can store a lot of data, more than 1,000 terabytes. It can back up your data. So it means if by mistake you remove a file, you will have backup files stored from the previous weeks. It has a lot of processors and memory, and meaning that you can run multiple complex computation in parallel. This remote system is nearly always on, which means that you can run some complex computation one evening, and you're going to have the computation running for days and having the results many days later. And then, and most importantly, this remote system allows multiple users to be connected at the same time, which means that we can share some data which is going to be stored in this remote system and going to be accessed by many users. And all these users are also going to share the processors and the memory from this remote system. So which means if I don't use the processor and memory, which is allowed to me, it can be used by different users if I'm not requiring it. So there are many advantages of using a remote system. The first one is about the data. You can store really, really large files on a remote system. These files are never lost because they are backup. So if your laptop crashes, for example, you can lose some data. It never happened with a remote system. And then your files are shared between collaborators, which means if you have a really large genetic files, you can share it with different collaborators and you don't have to multiplicate the file in different local systems. The second advantage is about the computations. So with a remote system, you can use more resources, something around 50 gigabytes of memory if your computation needs to. You can use several processors, more processors that you have on your local system. You can also run computation in parallel, which means that you can have hundreds of jobs of computation running at the same time. And then, as I said, the resources are shared between users. And the last advantage is you can access a remote system from any device with internet. So for example, you can connect to the broad server using either your laptop, your professional laptop, a personal laptop, or even your phone. So now let's see what are the advantages of command line interface and why it's worth learning a new language here. So the first advantage is the command line interface makes your task much faster and easier to use. The second one is that you have more control. Some commands are accessible only via shell and they are not available through a graphical user interface. The first one is that it's great for automated analysis. You can convert repetitive tasks into one command. So which means, for example, if you have to do some complex tasks, you can just create a command, a program to do that in shell. Then it's great to share and replicate analysis. You can share with some colleague or the command lines history you've done to replicate a GWAS analysis. And then, and most importantly, it's necessary to interact with a remote server because a remote server does not have a graphical user interface. So now let's see how to open a terminal. So if you are on Windows, you need to open the Ubuntu app that you need to have installed for this class. And if you're using a Mac, then you need to press the command button and the space button at the same time to open the search window. And then you only need to type terminal and then double click on the icon to open the Mac terminal. So now I'm going to show you how it is to open a terminal on my personal laptop, which is a Mac. So as I said, I'm just going to push the command and the space button. It opens the search little bar, and I'm just going to type terminal. It's going to propose me to open the terminal, and then I'm going to just select it and open it. And here you have a terminal with a prompt in gray. And you're going to start to type your command and see the outputs. So now we are done with the first part of this module. We've seen some terminology and how to open the terminal. And then we're going to jump to the next module, which is how to connect on the broad server.